What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors gets ambushed on live television by a host who thinks he can say whatever he wants? In just 36 seconds, George Stephanopoulos went from smiling morning show anchor to the man who pushed Denzel Washington too far, sparking a walkout that left the entire studio in absolute shock. But before we get into this unbelievable moment, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because we're pulling back the curtain on Hollywood's dark side, exposing entitled celebrities and their shocking behavior the cameras never showed you. We've got the raw footage they don't want you to see, and you won't want to miss a single reveal. Drop a comment below and let us know what you think about this outrageous behavior. Now let's get into what really happened that morning. The Good Morning America studio was buzzing with its usual energy. The lights were bright, the cameras were rolling, and the audience was settled in for what they thought would be just another celebrity interview. Denzel Washington had come on the show to talk about his latest project, a film that meant everything to him. He'd spent years developing it, pouring his heart and soul into every detail. This wasn't just another movie for Denzel. This was personal. Robin Roberts sat on one side of the desk, Michael Strahan on the other, and George Stephanopoulos right in the middle. They all had their coffee mugs, their notes, their practiced smiles. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed fine. Denzel walked onto the set looking sharp as always, wearing a perfectly tailored suit. He shook hands with everyone, gave Robin a warm hug, laughed with Michael. The audience clapped. The energy was good, positive, respectful. George started the interview with a simple question. Denzel, great to have you here. Tell us about this new film. Denzel smiled, leaning forward slightly. Thank you for having me, George. This film, man, it's been a journey. We spent 4 years putting this together. It's about redemption, about second chances, about how people can change when given the opportunity. It's something I really believe in. Robin jumped in, her voice warm and genuine. I heard you worked with some incredible young actors on this. What was that experience like? Beautiful, Denzel said, his eyes lighting up. These young people, they came in with so much hunger, so much talent. I wanted to create something that would inspire them, show them what's possible. We had kids from all kinds of backgrounds, and watching them grow throughout this process, that was the real reward. Michael nodded enthusiastically. That's amazing, man. I love that you're giving back like that. That's what it's all about. The interview was flowing naturally. Everyone was comfortable. Denzel was opening up, sharing stories from the set, talking about the message of the film, explaining why this project mattered so much to him. The audience was engaged, leaning in, listening to every word. Then George decided to take things in a different direction. You know, Denzel, George said, shuffling his papers with this little smirk on his face. There's been some talk about your past. Some people are saying you're only doing this redemption film because you have your own things to make up for. The energy in the room shifted immediately. Robin's smile faltered. Michael's eyes widened. You could feel the tension crack through the air like lightning. Denzel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Excuse me? He said quietly. George pressed on, leaning back in his chair like he was about to drop some big revelation. Well, there are rumors. Stories from people who've worked with you over the years. Some folks are saying you weren't always the easiest person to work with. So is this film your way of rewriting history? The studio went dead silent. The crew behind the cameras froze. Even the audience didn't know how to react. Denzel took a slow breath. George, I'm not sure where you're getting your information, but I came here to talk about this film and the incredible people who made it possible. If you have questions about the work, I'm happy to answer them. But George wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed to be enjoying this. I'm just asking the questions people want to know, Denzel. You've had a long career. Surely there are things you regret, things you wish you'd done differently. Robin tried to jump in, her voice diplomatic but firm. George, I think what's really interesting here is the film itself and the message Denzel is trying to share with. George cut her off. Robin, I'm conducting the interview here. He turned back to Denzel. So what about it? Are you trying to clean up your image? Denzel's jaw tightened, but his voice remained controlled. I've spent 40 years in this industry, building a career based on hard work, dedication, and respect. I've made mistakes like any human being, but I've never pretended to be perfect. This film isn't about me. It's about giving opportunities to young people who deserve a chance. George laughed, actually laughed. Come on, Denzel. You can't expect us to believe this is all altruistic. You're a Hollywood star. Everything is calculated. Everything is about image. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Hey, George, maybe we should… Michael, Please, George said, holding up his hand dismissively. Denzel is a big boy. He can handle a real conversation. He looked back at Denzel. So tell me, how much of this is genuine, and how much is just good publicity? Denzel sat very still. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured. George, I've answered your question multiple times. I'm not here to defend my character to you or anyone else. My work speaks for itself. The people I've worked with speak for themselves. If you have a problem with that, that's on you. But you're not answering the real question, George insisted, and now his voice had this edge to it, this arrogance that was impossible to miss. People want to know if you're for real or if this is just another Hollywood act. Robin tried again. I think what viewers really want to hear about is the film itself. Denzel, can you tell us about… Robin, I've got this, George snapped, and the disrespect in his voice was shocking. He turned back to Denzel. You've played a lot of tough guys, a lot of heroes, but what are you really? When the cameras are off, who is Denzel Washington? That's when something changed in Denzel's face. Not anger exactly. Something colder than that. Something final. Who am I? Denzel repeated slowly. I'm someone who came on this show with respect. Respect for you, respect for this program, respect for the audience watching. I came here to talk about something meaningful, something that could inspire people. But instead of having a real conversation, you're sitting here trying to tear me down based on what? Rumors? Gossip? Things you heard from unnamed sources? George opened his mouth to respond, but Denzel kept going. I've been doing interviews for decades, George. Decades. And I've dealt with all kinds of questions. Hard questions, uncomfortable questions. I don't run from that. But what you're doing right now? This isn't journalism. This isn't even a conversation. This is you trying to create a moment at my expense. I'm just doing my job, George said defensively. Your job? Denzel's voice rose slightly. Your job is to ambush guests? To make accusations without evidence? To disrespect someone who came here in good faith? The other host looked mortified. Robin had her hand over her mouth. Michael was staring at George with disbelief written all over his face. George's face was turning red now. I don't appreciate being spoken to this way, Denzel. I'm the host of this show. I ask the questions I think are important, and I don't appreciate being disrespected. Denzel shot back. You think because you're behind that desk you can say whatever you want? You think you can question my integrity, my motives, my character, and I'm just supposed to sit here and smile? You're being overly sensitive, George said, and that was the worst thing he could have said. Denzel laughed, but there was no humor in it. Overly sensitive, right. So when someone questions your entire life's work based on nothing, you just brush it off? I would handle it professionally, George said smugly. Professionally, Denzel repeated. Like you're handling this interview professionally? By attacking your guest? By ignoring basic courtesy? George's voice went cold. Nobody is attacking you, Denzel. If you can't handle tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. And that was it. That was the moment. Denzel stood up. Slowly, deliberately. He reached up and unclipped his microphone with steady hands. The silence in the studio was deafening. Denzel, wait, Robin said quickly, standing up too. Please, we can… Denzel looked at her, and his expression softened. Robin, I have nothing but respect for you. Michael, you too. But this? He gestured toward George. This is something else entirely. He turned back to George, who was sitting there looking shocked that someone had actually called him out. You know what the difference is between us, George? I came here with respect. You came here with an agenda. And I'm not going to sit here and let you disrespect me on national television just so you can have your viral moment. You're walking off? George said. And now he was trying to sound outraged, like Denzel was the one being unreasonable. You're really going to walk off the show because you don't like my questions? I'm walking off, Denzel said calmly, because you're not asking questions. You're making accusations. And I don't have to sit here and take that from you or anyone else. George stood up now too, his face flushed. This is incredibly unprofessional, Denzel. We invited you on this show, and I accepted that invitation in good faith, Denzel interrupted. But you turned this into something ugly. That's on you, not me. Michael finally stood up, trying to play peacemaker. Hey, let's all just take a breath here. Maybe we can start over, talk about the film. But Denzel was already moving toward the edge of the set. I appreciate that, Michael, but no. Some things you can't come back from. This is one of them. George's voice went sharp and nasty. You're making a huge mistake, Denzel. Walking off like this, it makes you look guilty. It makes you look like you have something to hide." Denzel stopped, turned around, looked George dead in the eye. "No, George. It makes me look like someone who knows their worth. Someone who won't let a bully push them around just because that bully has a microphone and a camera." The audience gasped. Someone in the crew whispered something urgent into a headset. Robin looked like she wanted to disappear. George tried to recover, to save face. "I'm not a bully. I'm a journalist asking legitimate questions." "Legitimate questions," Denzel said, shaking his head. "You know what a legitimate question is? Asking about the film. Asking about the process. Asking about the message we're trying to send. What you did? That was a hit job, and I'm not going to participate in it." "You're being dramatic," George said, and the condescension in his voice was unbelievable. Denzel just smiled, a sad smile. "You really don't get it, do you? You really think this is okay?" He looked out at the audience, many of whom were nodding in agreement with him. "I apologize to all of you watching at home. I came here with excitement, ready to share something meaningful. I'm sorry you had to witness this instead." Then he looked back at the panel one more time. "Robin, Michael, it was good to see you both. I hope we can do this again sometime under better circumstances." He didn't even glance at George, and then he walked off, just like that. Left the set while the cameras were still rolling. For a moment, nobody moved. George stood there looking stunned and angry. Robin had tears in her eyes. Michael looked furious but was clearly trying to hold it together. Finally, George sat back down, trying to compose himself. "Well, that was, unexpected. We'll be right back after this break." But as soon as they cut to commercial, you could hear the chaos erupting in the studio. Producers rushing onto the set, George and Robin having a heated exchange. Michael walking off, shaking his head. The audience sat there in shock, talking amongst themselves, pulling out their phones to text people about what they just witnessed. Back in the control room, producers were scrambling. This wasn't a planned moment. This wasn't a publicity stunt. This was a genuine walk-off, a real conflict that just played out on live television. When they came back from commercial, George tried to act like nothing major had happened. "Well, that was certainly interesting. Denzel Washington has left the building, folks. Sometimes interviews don't go the way you plan." Robin looked directly into the camera, her voice firm. "I just want to say that Denzel Washington is a respected actor who has contributed enormously to cinema and to mentoring young talent. Whatever disagreement happened here today, that doesn't change his legacy or the importance of the work he's doing." Michael nodded in agreement. "Absolutely. Much respect to Denzel, always." George looked irritated but tried to move on. "Let's go to our next segment." But you could see it in everyone's faces. The damage was done. The mask had slipped. People had seen exactly what kind of host George could be when he thought he could get away with it. The crew members were exchanging looks. The audience was still buzzing. Social media was already exploding with reactions. Later, during another commercial break, Robin turned to George, her voice low but clearly angry. "What were you thinking? That was completely out of line." "I was asking questions," George said defensively. "That's what we do." "No," Michael cut in, his voice hard. "That's not what we do. We don't ambush guests. We don't make accusations without proof. And we definitely don't dismiss our co-hosts when they try to help." George waved them off. "You're both overreacting. This is news. This is what gets ratings." "At what cost?" Robin asked. "You just drove off one of the most respected actors in Hollywood. You embarrassed this show. You embarrassed yourself." "I was doing my job," George insisted. "No," a producer said, stepping onto the set. "You went rogue. That wasn't in the pre-interview. That wasn't approved. You made this personal, and now we're dealing with the fallout." George's face went red. "Are you seriously taking his side?" "I'm not taking sides," the producer said. "I'm looking at what just happened. And what happened is, you crossed a line." The rest of the show was awkward. George tried to act normal, but you could see he was rattled. Robin and Michael kept their distance, speaking to him only when absolutely necessary. The audience could feel it too. The warmth that usually filled the Good Morning America studio was gone, replaced by this cold tension that made everyone uncomfortable. When the show finally ended, George walked off the set without saying goodbye to anyone. Robin and Michael stayed behind talking to the crew, apologizing for what had happened. One audience member was overheard saying to her friend, "I can't believe he treated Denzel like that. That was so disrespectful." Another person nodded. George was completely out of line. Denzel had every right to walk off. A crew member, speaking quietly to a colleague, said, "I've worked here for 8 years. I've never seen anything like that. George went way too far." The makeup artist who had worked with Denzel before the show said, "He was such a gentleman when he arrived. So kind to everyone. He didn't deserve that treatment." Meanwhile, Denzel was in his car, heading away from the studio. His publicist was on the phone, already fielding calls from other media outlets wanting his side of the story. But Denzel wasn't interested in making this bigger than it already was. "I said what I needed to say," he told his publicist. "I'm not going to keep talking about it. People saw what happened. They can make their own judgments." Back at the studio, the producers were in an emergency meeting. The network executives were being briefed. Everyone knew this was going to be a major story. "We need to address this," one executive said. "This is going to be everywhere by tonight." "What do you want us to say?" the head producer asked. "I don't know yet, but we can't just ignore it. A major celebrity walked off our show because one of our hosts decided to go off script and attack him." In the makeup room, the stylists were talking. "Did you see Denzel's face when George started with those accusations? He looked so hurt at first, then just disappointed." "George has always had an ego," another stylist said. "But this was next level. He really thought he could just say whatever he wanted. And the way he dismissed Robin? That was awful. She was trying to save the interview, and he just shut her down." Michael looked like he wanted to punch something. "I've never seen him that upset on camera." Back in the production office, someone pulled up the footage. They watched it again, seeing every moment of the confrontation. "Look at this," one producer said, pointing at the screen. "George smirks right before he asks that first accusatory question. He planned this. He wanted to create drama. But at what cost?" another producer asked. "We just lost all credibility with a huge portion of our audience. People love Denzel. They're not going to side with George on this." And look at the body language. Denzel tried to stay calm, tried to redirect multiple times. He gave George so many chances to back off. George just kept pushing. The assistant director shook her head. "I've been in television for 23 years. You never, ever treat a guest like that. I don't care who you are. That was cruel and unnecessary." Throughout the day, the phones at Good Morning America didn't stop ringing. Viewers calling in, most of them expressing support for Denzel and anger at George. "I've been watching your show for 15 years, one caller said. "After what I saw this morning, I don't know if I can anymore. That was disgraceful." Another caller. "George Stephanopoulos should apologize. What he did to Denzel Washington was wrong on every level." And another. "I hope Denzel knows that the audience was on his side. We saw what happened. We saw who was in the wrong." The social media team was overwhelmed. The clip of Denzel walking off was being shared thousands of times per minute. The comments were running heavily in Denzel's favor. "George thought he could bully Denzel Washington. Wrong move. That's what integrity looks like." Denzel wasn't having it. Mad respect to Denzel for standing up for himself. Nobody should have to tolerate that kind of treatment. Other celebrities started weighing in too. Actors, directors, people who had worked with Denzel over the years. One director tweeted, "I've worked with Denzel on 3 films. He's the most professional, kind, and dedicated person I've ever met. What happened on Good Morning America today was shameful." An actress posted, "Denzel Washington has been a mentor to countless young actors, including me. He's given so much to this industry. He deserved better than what he got this morning." By evening, the narrative was clear. This wasn't a case of a difficult celebrity having a meltdown. This was a case of a respected professional being pushed too far by a host who overstepped. Some media analysts started breaking down what went wrong. George Stephanopoulos made several critical errors. One analyst explained on their own show. First, he ambushed his guest with unsubstantiated accusations. Second, he dismissed his co-hosts when they tried to redirect. Third, he doubled down when given multiple opportunities to back off. And fourth, he tried to blame Denzel for walking off when any reasonable person would have done the same. Another analyst added, "This is a masterclass in what not to do as an interviewer. You can ask tough questions without being disrespectful. You can challenge your guests without attacking them." George forgot that basic principle. A veteran journalist weighed in. "I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, controversial figures. You can be tough and still be fair. You can be challenging and still be respectful." What George did today was neither tough nor fair. It was just mean. Back at the studio, Robin and Michael recorded a joint statement. "We want to make it clear that the views and approach taken by George Stephanopoulos this morning do not represent how we conduct ourselves or how we treat our guests. Denzel Washington is a treasured member of the entertainment community, and we deeply regret that his appearance on our show ended the way it did. The network released their own statement. We are reviewing today's events and taking them very seriously. Good Morning America has always prided itself on respectful, thoughtful interviews, and we acknowledge that today's interview did not meet that standard. But George himself remained silent. No apology, no explanation, just silence. His colleagues noticed. "He's hiding," one producer said. "He knows he messed up, but he's too proud to admit it." "Pride comes before the fall," another replied. And George is about to learn that lesson the hard way. The next morning, when Good Morning America aired again, George was noticeably subdued. He read his teleprompter, did his segments, but the energy was different. The confidence was gone. Robin and Michael carried the show, their chemistry doing the heavy lifting. But everyone could feel the elephant in the room. During a commercial break, Robin looked at George. "Are you going to address what happened yesterday?" "The network told me not to," George said quietly. "The network told you not to? Or you don't want to?" Michael asked. George didn't answer. The audience at home noticed too. The ratings for that day's show were high, people tuning in to see if George would say anything. But his silence spoke volume. Meanwhile, Denzel went about his business. He did other interviews, talking about his film with outlets that treated him with respect. Each interview was warm, engaging, full of insight. "Notice how different he is when he's treated with basic decency?" one observer noted. "He's funny, he's open, he's generous with his time and knowledge." George could have had that interview. Instead, he chose confrontation. The film Denzel had been promoting went on to be a huge success. Critics loved it, audiences loved it, and everywhere he went to promote it, interviewers made a point of being respectful, having clearly learned from George's mistake. At one interview, a host said, "Denzel, thank you for being here. I just want you to know you're in a safe space. We're here to talk about your amazing work, nothing else." Denzel smiled. "I appreciate that, and that's all I've ever wanted. Just a real conversation about the work." That interview was beautiful, insightful, inspiring. Everything the Good Morning America interview could have been. Back at Good Morning America, things were changing. George's role on the show was being quietly reduced. More segments were going to Robin and Michael. Guest bookings were dropping for any segments George was hosting. "People don't trust him anymore," a booking agent told a producer. "My clients see what happened with Denzel, and they don't want to risk it." The audience numbers reflected this too. Viewership was down on days George was hosting, up on days he wasn't. The message was clear. Actions have consequences. You can't treat people badly and expect there to be no fallout. One industry veteran summed it up perfectly. George Stephanopoulos learned an expensive lesson that day. Respect is not optional. Decency is not negotiable. And when you're given the privilege of a platform, you have a responsibility to use it wisely. He failed on all counts, and Denzel Washington reminded everyone what integrity looks like. The whole situation became a teaching moment in journalism, schools, and media training programs. "This is what happens when ego overtakes professionalism," instructors would tell their students, showing the clip. "This is what happens when you forget that the person across from you is a human being deserving of respect." And through it all, Denzel remained gracious. He never gloated, never dragged George through the mud. He simply continued doing what he'd always done, working hard, treating people well, and letting his actions speak louder than words. That's the real story here. Not just about a walk-off, not just about a confrontation, but about what happens when someone with true character faces disrespect and chooses dignity over retaliation, about what it means to know your worth and refuse to compromise it, no matter who's asking you to. George Stephanopoulos tried to create a moment that morning. He succeeded, just not in the way he intended. He created a moment that showed the world exactly what kind of person he could be when given unchecked power. And he created a moment that showed the world exactly what kind of person Denzel Washington is when faced with that power. Unbowed, unbroken, and unwilling to compromise his principles for anyone. In those 36 seconds when George first launched into his accusations, he didn't realize he was starting a chain of events that would define both of their legacies in completely different ways. He thought he was creating compelling television. Instead, he created a cautionary tale about the importance of respect, the power of integrity, and the consequences of forgetting that behind every celebrity is a human being who deserves to be treated with basic dignity.